Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding Devy. I am Brandon Hay, and you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And this podcast is brought to you by the IDP guys. Please remember to like and subscribe our YouTube page. There's tons of great content and different videos helping you win your fantasy football leagues. So we had week 3, not as many big matchups, but there were still some interesting games and some big performers. So let's get into talking about week 3 before we go into week 4. Like I said, not a ton of top 25 games. I thought Michigan State would come on top of Washington, but Michael Penix Jr. played very well, showed his form back to that 2020 season before he got injured. Michigan State still has trouble defending the pass. They got down early and they just couldn't come back. So huge win for Washington. A big change from last year where they couldn't pass the ball. Now they have a quarterback. We'll have to look at Michael Penix Jr. see if he continues this all year, and then he might be able to move up to a middle round NFL draft pick. BYU ended up beating Baylor in overtime, but this time Oregon was just too much for them. Oregon got out to a nice lead. And even though Hall had around 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, a lot of that came when the game was already in hand. So Oregon's defense really stopped BYU. Another big Pac-12 win for the conference. Miami and Texas A&M. After Texas A&M lost to Appalachian State, a lot of people thought they were in trouble. This was a big game for Miami. If they won, it set themselves up for the next few games as their schedule wasn't too difficult. But Texas A&M defense played very well, stopping Miami. Something with Miami that a lot of people have said is that with Josh Gaddis coming over from Michigan, they were going to be more run heavy, which they are. They were top 30 now in rush attempts per game compared to last year where they were around 100. So Tyler Van Dyke isn't getting the opportunities to throw the ball as much as last year. And I personally just don't think Josh Gaddis is a great schematically in the passing game. Gets some matchups, but doesn't necessarily get people wide open. And we saw there's some struggling there. So we'll have to see how Miami bounces back and if they can pass the ball against the better teams. Texas A&M saved their season there. They did have that loss to Appalachian State, but if they can run the table in the SEC, they could still have a chance at postseason play. Texas Tech and NC State. Devin Leary didn't have a huge game, but NC State's defense played really well, and they were able to outlast Texas Tech. So NC State continues their winning ways this season and see what they can do once they start playing in ACC play. And lastly, Penn State and Auburn. I thought this would be a closer game, but Penn State's defense really shut down Auburn. Auburn's offense couldn't really do anything on the ground, passing the ball, and then I was wrong. Nick Singleton had a big game, had 2 rushing touchdowns, over 100 yards. Sean Clifford did enough passing game. It looks like Auburn's in real trouble, and they could be looking for a new coach this season. So it'll be interesting how that goes. But Penn State won again, and they could be on a collision course in mid-October against Michigan. That could be 2 top 10 teams by that time possibly. So watch out for that. All right, some key performers. Jalen Daniels for Kansas. He had a huge game, 281 total yards, 5 touchdowns. Cam Ward with Washington State, the transfer, 299 pass yards and 4 touchdowns. As I said, Michael Penix Jr. with Washington, 397 pass yards, 4 touchdowns. Michigan State secondary has to get better by Big Ten play, or they won't be able to compete at all. Blake Corum didn't have a ton of yards, but had 5 touchdowns against UConn. They really, anytime they got close, they gave the ball to him. He's looked good between the tackles, obviously has that speed. So he's a Devy running back that's trending up. Bijan Robinson against UTSA had over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. His best game of the season, and just shows why he's the Devy running back 1. In 2023 will be the number 1 running back, possibly the 101 in rookie drafts. And then Nick Singleton, as I said, another 100 yards, a couple touchdowns, really taking over that job. Brock Bowers from Georgia, nothing really new. He's a elite tight end, probably the Devy tight end number 2 behind Michael Mayer, just because he's younger. But he finally had a breakout game this year, 5 catches, 121 yards, 2 touchdowns. Georgia just destroyed South Carolina. And lastly, this is a more under the radar, probably not in college football, but just in maybe Devy circles. Charlie Jones, he's a transfer from Iowa. Him and Tyrone Tracy transferred from Iowa to Purdue. I thought Tracy would have the bigger year being more in the slot, but Charlie Jones has that connection with Aiden O'Connell. This game, he had 11 receptions for 188 yards and a touchdown in a losing effort, but he has had production all year. 36 catches on the year. And if he continues this production, he'll move up draft boards. Probably not, day 1 or day 2, but look for him on day 3, and he could possibly make a splash for a team in the NFL looking for another wide receiver that's under the radar. All right, let's look at some games some marquee games for this coming week. I know Wisconsin is not ranked, but the Wisconsin-Ohio State game usually is a big game, somewhat of a rivalry for them. Wisconsin always can run the ball, play good defense, probably not as good defensively this year. Offensively, struggles to pass the ball sometimes. They can get up on Ohio State early, but then usually Ohio State comes back. So it'll be interesting how much that Ohio State defense has improved. I think they will relatively shut down Braylon Allen, so Graham Mertz is going to have to throw the ball, and I don't know if that Wisconsin defense can shut down Ohio State, especially with Jackson Smith and Jigba coming back. So I see Ohio State winning this one comfortably, especially since they're at home. But it'll be interesting if Wisconsin does their normal traditional offense or tries to open up a little bit and compete with the Buckeyes. A big contest in the ACC is Clemson versus Wake Forest. Wake Forest got their quarterback back in Sam Hartman. Last year, he had over 300 yards against Clemson. The big thing for Clemson is we know that they have the defense. They can run the ball, but can DJU pass the ball efficiently enough, if the defense happens to struggle against offense? So this will be a good test for Clemson early on to see, because this Wake Forest offense with Sam Hartman is very good. But we'll see because Wake Forest did not have a very good defense last year. We'll see if they've improved some in this game. I think Will Shipley will have a pretty big game in this one, and that should possibly set up some good passing opportunities. This is the perfect time for DJU to put the critics down and kind of elevate himself to be a quality starter and put Clemson really in the conversation of competing for a national championship. I know they're number 5, but a lot of people just don't think they have the passing game to do that. So Anthony Richardson has really come down from the heights of that win over Utah. Struggled mightily against Kentucky. Did not do that much better against South Florida last week. Struggled passing the ball. It was a very tight game. Now they go to Knoxville to play Tennessee. Tennessee's offense is really rolling. So I see Tennessee winning this game, probably by at least a touchdown. But it will be interesting to see if Anthony Richardson can, grow from these past 2 games and get the passing game going. We know he can run, but obviously teams are going to key up on that running and make him pass the ball. Another test for Texas A&M when Arkansas comes to town. KJ Jefferson had a very good game this past week. Raheem Sanders is just running the ball very, very well. They have a good 1-2 punch there. So we'll see if Texas A&M can score enough to keep up with Arkansas. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game early, but I actually think Arkansas is going to come out on top on this one. I just don't know if Texas A&M can consistently pass the ball and score enough points. And I think Arkansas, with their good defense, can shut down Texas A&M. And lastly, Oregon versus Washington State. Washington State is not ranked, but they've looked impressive this year. We'll see with Oregon going on the road if they can get 2 back-to-back games going. See if Kim Ward can keep it going, and with the midst of Nakia Watson and Oregon, the midst of those players, and if Bo Nix can keep from making the big mistakes, because that's always what really holds him back. Some IDP players to watch that had good weeks this past week. Brenton Cox Jr. from Florida. He's edged, had 9 tackles, 1 tackle for loss versus South Florida. He's been playing very well this season. Bo Braid from Maryland. Safety had 15 tackles, interception, 2 passes defended, and a forced fumble last week. Maryland plays Michigan this week, so he'll get tested both in the run and the passing game. So it'll be interesting to see if Maryland can keep up with Michigan, or if it's going to be another year where they start, blowing out non-conference teams. But when they get into conference against tougher teams, they aren't really able to compete. Garrett Williams, someone I kind of talked about before this season about, a good defensive back. Not necessarily shut down, but, a solid corner that can make tackles and play very well. Who could sneak into a day 2 player. He had 10 tackles and 2 passes defended against that good Purdue passing attack this week. Drew Sanders comes in again, the transfer from Alabama. Another huge week, 12 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 1 pass defended. At linebacker, it'll be interesting how he plays against Texas A&M. This will be one of his bigger tests. And if he can continue to put up these huge tackle numbers, he's someone to look out for. And lastly, Jalen Ford from Texas. He played very well against Alabama also. Believe close to double-digit tackles. And this past week against UTSA, he had 15 tackles, half a tackle for loss, and 1 forced fumble. So there's some players to see how they do coming weeks. See if they should continue to stay on your radar in IDP leagues. Starts and sits last week, I did better, very well, 7 out of 10 correct this week. So for a start, they finished in the top 24 at their position. At a sit, they finished outside the top 24. Evan Hull, another great game, finished in a running back 18. Jalen Daniels, we talked about key performers, QB1 with 50 points. Jordan Mims didn't really do that. Fresno State struggled more against USC than I thought they would. Trayson Potts was a big miss for me. Finished as running back 205. Minnesota blew out Colorado, but Potts just didn't get the work that he had been getting in blowouts the weeks before. Carson Steele, running back 20, 31.25 for Ball State. He gets the ball a lot, so he's someone, especially in MAC play, that I really like to play. I was wrong on Nick Singleton that he wouldn't have a good game, but he did finish outside the top 24 at number 35 with 26.9 points. That's 3. Devin Achane is right. Austin Reed and Toa got stopped by that Iowa defense, so all those finished out of the top 24. Someone I was really wrong about is Michael Penix Jr. Finishes QB 11 with 41.28 points. So now overall, I've gone 12 out of 19, 63%. So, a lot better. So I was around 55% last week, 5 of 9. So I'm improving. So continue to tune in for those starts and sits if you are playing any college fantasy, regular just college fantasy, or any C2C leagues. This week, my starts are Zay Flowers versus Florida State. Boston College is not a great team this year, but Zay Flowers is good and it gets targeted quite a bit. You saw that Florida State defense struggled against Louisville last week, so I think he could have a big game. Henry Parrish, the running back from Miami against Middle Tennessee. I think, obviously, as I said, they run the ball quite a bit, and he seems to be the lead running back in that backfield. So I see him doing well against Middle Tennessee State. Daquan Finn, the quarterback from Toledo that has played very well, even put up fairly good numbers against Ohio State last week. He could be definitely someone you want to look for maybe next year transferring to a bigger school because he has over, I believe, 80 yards every game rushing. He's able to pass the ball very well, a dual threat. So I have him against San Diego State. That Washington offense seems to be going. So Jalen McMillan versus Stanford. Stanford struggled against USC the last game they played passing the ball. So I could see him having a big game. John Reese Plumlee for UCF at quarterback. He's able to run the ball, pass the ball. Georgia Tech team is just not very good. And it seemed like Ole Miss could really do whatever they wanted, especially running the ball. Since Deuce Vaughn versus Oklahoma, I just don't think he's going to put up the kind of numbers, and Oklahoma is going to really be able to shut that down. Braylon Allen versus Ohio State, I kind of said this. He might, approach 100 yards, but I don't see him having the kind of numbers to finish in the top 24. Sam Hartman, I think he will approach 300 yards, but maybe have a couple turnovers and not throw for that many touchdowns. So that's why I have him as sit. Keaton Mitchell versus Navy. Navy is very good against the rush. They're only allowing around 90 yards a game, and they control the ball so long that it's going to be very hard for them, for Eastern Carolina to have that many possessions. And lastly, E.J. Smith from Stanford against Washington. Washington's actually, top 50 team against the rush this year. So I don't see him having a huge game, especially since if Washington is scoring quite a bit, Stanford's going to have to turn to the pass more. So the bets last week, I went for 2 for 2. I was right with the Syracuse pick'em because they won by 4. Was right on the Minnesota by 27. They won by 42. Was wrong by Iowa just a bit. Iowa won by 27. Nevada didn't score at all. I thought Nevada would be able to score something there. And the Fresno State and USC over, it was actually 62. Hayner got hurt in the third quarter. Wasn't doing much before, so I don't know if he stayed in the game third and fourth if they would have gotten over, but 2-2 there. So now 4-8 for the season, but did at least 50-50 this week. So I'll try to do better this coming week. So these are the bets this week. I like Oklahoma to win by 13 against Kansas State. Kansas State had a bad game last week. We'll see if it was because they were looking forward, but I think Oklahoma has the defense and can score the ball with Dylan Gabriel enough with their weapons to beat Kansas State at home by 2 touchdowns. Colorado is just a bad team, so I have UCLA beating them by 21. I know UCLA struggled last week, but Colorado is just not very good. I think they'll be able to run the ball, and Robinson will be able to have a good game. UNLV has won 2 out of 3. They're a 2.5-point favorite, even on the road at Utah State. I think UNLV just has the better offense, and Utah State lost to Weber State last week pretty handily, so they're struggling this year. And last is Kent State at Georgia. I'm taking the under at 62.5. That Georgia defense is smothering, so it's probably either going to be a shutout or very low scoring. And Georgia, usually in those games, I see them getting to 40 or 50 points and shutting it down, so that I've got the under for that one. So last week in my DFS lineup, Garrett Schrader was obviously very good. Jalen Daniels, 45, very good. Byron Caldwell didn't even play. Then, Potts was obviously wrong on that. Jaden Ott was shut down against Notre Dame. Nathaniel Dell did all right with 13.9, but we would have wanted more for him for what we paid. Charlie Jones, very good play against Syracuse. And Hippenhammer, good for the amount we paid. He had 62 receiving yards and a touchdown. So let's see what I have picked for this week. So I'm paying, I'm actually surprised Drake May is kind of low here. But, even though Notre Dame's defense has looked okay, it's the offense that's been bad. Give me him because they're going to have to score a bunch of points. So I like him. Will Shipley, I was talking about him earlier. I think he has a big game against Wake Forest. Nick Singleton in Central Michigan. See, the only thing that could hurt him is if they get up big and he's not in the game. Xavier Worthy, I think they're going to try to find a way to get him the ball quite a bit, a lot of short passes. Jalen Hyatt has been very good for Tennessee the last couple of weeks, so I think he could really do well against Florida. That North Carolina defense is horrible. I know that Notre Dame offense hasn't been great, but I see Michael Mayer having a good game. And only at 5,900, I thought I could try for him. Nathaniel Pete, the running back from Missouri, we saw Singleton run all over Auburn. So I think that Missouri will try to establish a run, and he could have a sneaky good game this week. And lastly, Peyton Thorne against Minnesota. I think they'll have to throw the ball a little bit against Minnesota because Michigan State's defense isn't great. So that's what I have him there. He's usually good for over 200 yards and a couple of touchdowns. So I like that floor, but obviously there's ceiling for a higher game from him. So prize picks, I went 2 of 3. Hendon Hooker had over 215 passing yards, finished with 298. Spencer Rattler ended up with 8 yards. I thought there would be more sacks by Georgia. Georgia handled them, but not the sacks. Rattler was actually more. Anthony Grant, he had great games. Only finished with 36 rushing yards. It seems like there's going to be a more committee type backfield now that Scott Frost is gone. They really are letting the other running backs get the ball more, so that's a little worrisome for Anthony Grant on how great he has been. Sean Tucker was really shut down by Purdue, and in the passing game, he only had 23 receiving yards, so that was a less. And KJ Jefferson went way over to 226.5 pass yards and rush yards. He had 425. So 2 of 3 for that. So that takes me to 714 at 33%. So let's see if we can get some more winners this week. So like I said, Sam Hartman last year had 300 yards. I think they're not going to be able to run the ball against Clemson, so he's going to have to pass the ball. So I have him over the 294.5. Jerry Bohannon at 184.5 passing yards. 2 out of 3, he's been under that passing number. So I like the less. Nakia Watson at 55.5 against Oregon. I know the Oregon defense has been playing well since that Georgia game, but he has 2 of his 3 games so far in the season over 70 yards, so I took the over. And lastly, Garrett Schrader at rush yards plus pass yards, 262.5. And I have him as over because all 3 of his games, if you add the totals up, they've been over for that. So those are the bets I like. A little review on Devy and the games to watch this week. So make sure to subscribe to the IDP Guys channel, like the video, comment on anything you want to see in the future, and enjoy the games this week. And again, I'm Brandon Hay, and find me at HayB3. And this is Decoding Devy. Until next week.